Hi, I'm Lisa Gale, and you're listening to the podcast for Texas Holistic Educators. So many parents and teachers these days have big concerns about the current state of modern education and are seeking a healthier way, one that addresses kids' whole brain needs as well as their emotional, physical, and spiritual needs. Texas Holistic Educators connect parents and teachers across the state who are cultivating healthy practices in their schools and homes with the intention of empowering others to do the same. My guest today is Brooke Bailey. Brooke is the founder of SunBee Circle, where she performs oral stories and puppet shows for children at places like Texas Children's Hospital, Houston Theater District Day, Earth Day Houston, and many schools for preschool and school-age children. She studied Waldorf Puppetry at the Sunbridge Institute in New York with Connie Manson and playworking with Jill Wood at the Parish School Adventure Playground. Brooke is currently a resident teaching artist with Writers in the Schools and Young Audiences Houston. She's also an artist and writer who's exhibited in Houston and Berlin. Currently, she's trying to publish her novel, a fairy tale, of course. And for more information about Brooke and SunBee Circle, you can go to her website, www.sunbeecircle.com. So welcome, Brooke.
Hi, well, thank you.
So I'm really excited to dig in. I love the work that you're doing. I love the passion and the heart and the authenticity that you bring to your work. And I would love to hear you talk about what you're doing now and maybe even how your work has evolved.
Okay. Well, right now I am doing a couple of things. I always am sort of doing a couple of things at once. But I am working in Writers in the Schools, where I go into pre-kindergarten and kindergarten classrooms, and I'm a writing teacher, which sounds funny because these little guys mostly can't write yet. So mostly what I do is I perform a puppet show for them. I have a little suitcase, and I open it up, and it has very simple handmade tabletop puppets, which I just move sort of like little dolls, and I move them around with my hands. And the children just love this. They'll imitate it. They'll follow the story. I can tell like a 20-minute story, and they're just absolutely fascinated. Children just love puppets. And then what I want to really immerse them into the story, so we'll often act it out. Sometimes I'll ask them to tell me a different ending. Sometimes we'll use music, and also a lot of play, like playing with objects or loose parts. But basically what I want is for them to just totally get immersed and inspired in their imaginations and start making up stories, which young children actually do all the time anyways. But when they've seen a story structure and they're given a model, they can take it even further. And so yeah, that's what I do.
So I loved, and I've seen your suitcase, and it's like a magical box of wonders that you never know what's going to pop out of it next. And when you described how you do the work, what I heard was simplicity. There's a simplicity to it, and I wonder if that's consciously chosen as a strategy for you, the simplicity, and if so, why?
Yes, it's very intentional because I don't quite consider myself a performer for children. I consider myself a storyteller. So I make the puppets simple. I sew them myself, and I'm actually not a great sewer, so they're pretty primitive. Sometimes I'll make them out of all paper or toilet paper rolls, or just use little stuffed animals or dolls that I find. But I do this so that the children can imitate me. And they do. A lot of times parents have told me their kids come home and they drag out an old suitcase and they're getting out their stuffed animals and they're making stories and they're making their own puppet shows. So I never want it to be like I've seen great puppeteers and they're like magicians. You know, you don't see their hands. The puppets are moving. It's totally magical experience, and I love that. But what I want to do is show the children, like, I want them to think like, oh, I could totally do that myself, you know. So that's why I keep it very simple. Yeah, because I want them to do it too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And they do. I've seen them. They do. And I know that you're doing work with writers, young writers. What's the connection between a child getting really excited about a story that they want to tell, and can that fuel some encouragement for them to learn the written skills to communicate that?
Yes, definitely. So I feel like in schools, children already read a lot of picture books. Actually, Lisa, could I sort of double back and say how I got into this work? Because it kind of
Please.
relates to that question. Okay.
For sure.
So I started out teaching preschool in a really cute German language bilingual preschool. So it was pretty play-based. It was a nice little place. But for my lessons, I had a curriculum I needed to follow. So and I love children's books. Love them, and I'd go to the library and get all these books. But I had to read books about like how to brush your teeth, why we wash our hands, meet the fireman on your block, or just sort of like life skill books like that. And those are great and they're important. Or like really moral books like this is why we have good manners and stuff. But what I did on free time was I would read fairy tale books. I'd also always check out these wild like fairy tale books, and the kids would just clamor towards me like, Brooke, read me the fairy story. Read me Rumpelstiltskin again. Tell me a story. So I would tell these wild stories, full of like trolls and danger and gold and excitement, and they could not get enough of them. And I thought, wow, I wish that I could just do this all the time, I wish I could tell these stories and not these, like, boring brush your teeth stories, which I know there's a place to. Brushing teeth's important, but I wanted to give them the fairy tale stories. And I noticed it, too, in their play. Sometimes they would play, like, Let's Meet the Fireman, but usually it was, like, let's save Darth Vader from the raging fire in the castle. I mean, their stories were wild and really complex. And the story structure would double back on themselves, and it were complicated emotions. And I thought, wow, they're not getting these stories. I had these stories when I was little, but they're not getting them. And that's why they want to play like these scary video games and watch these scary superhero movies, because they need that. They'll do anything for that kind of story. So fast forward through a few events, but eventually I started my own program where I thought I'll just meet some moms in the park and they can bring their kids, and I will tell these stories that I want to tell, and then we'll play them. We'll sort of act them out, we'll play them, and we'll really immerse ourselves into the story. So they'll have this play frame of these great stories that they can experiment with story structure, and they learn new vocabulary, and they have visual images that they might not have ever thought of before. And also they can act out a lot of their emotions, because in a fairy tale the stakes are high. It's not like a lot of, for instance, there's a lot of books like Janie goes to preschool for the first day, and it's like first she's a little scared and she says goodbye to mom, and then she meets the teacher and everything works out and she makes a friend, and that's great. But a child's emotions are as deep as an adult's. I mean, They're what children are small humans. And a first day at preschool can be more like a little girl goes into the dark woods. She's all alone. Is there a wolf there? I mean, it's scary to enter a preschool, like that's the depth of their emotions and feelings. And I feel like a fairy tale, they can identify with that, where these other books that just are saying everything is okay is like, they're nice, but they're not really, I don't think they're emotionally articulate enough for those kids and their feelings. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so I think to leave them out, and for kids just not to get them, then kids will go to other sources to get them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you think in some ways maybe, there's wonderful children's literature available now, but the way you just described that is making me wonder, have we created this sort of this sense that emotions are kind of shallow and easy to manage?
I think so. I think those books are mostly all about managing an emotion. There's a book I really love, a picture book that I've used, and it's like when Sophie gets really, really angry, runs out into nature, and she screams. And it's a wonderful book. It's just like the perfect way you would love a child to handle their anger. And I'd read it to kids at the preschool when they were freaking out or having a tantrum. We'd go to the calm down corner and read it. But it's also kind of like, I'm in a preschool with this kid. They're not allowed to go outside by themselves. They're not allowed to scream anywhere. I would get in trouble with the director of that preschool. They're not allowed to scream inside. They're not allowed to go outside and scream. All we can do is go and watch Sophie do what is helpful with anger, but you can't do it. It's just very odd. And there's a lot of picture books about like, be yourself, do your own thing, like the rainbow fish. But I read these books to my students, and it's like, can you be yourself? Not here, sweetie. You need to do what the class is doing. And it's just odd. We tell these stories to our children, but the system they're in is very different. And I think it must be very confusing to them. So I think these books, as helpful as they are, they're a little too simple for the emotional needs of a child.
That's a big thing that you just said, and it's a big idea to really just be with. And I feel like I'd like to probe it further, but it feels so big for me. I think I also don't want to shy away from it, because what I think you're talking about is children need to know that it's safe to be who they truly are, and they need to know that it's safe to feel how they truly feel, and that it's okay.
Yeah.
And I wonder what's possible for a child and for a community of children in a space like that, where it all truly is okay to feel. And then I wonder what could come of that. I wonder what you think about that.
I think that would be great. And I think sometimes people think like, well, then all the kids will be screaming in class. We can't have that. I certainly don't want that. But it's okay to feel angry even if you can't scream. You don't have to get rid of it necessarily. I was thinking of a story that I do use. I used a lot after Hurricane Harvey. Could I talk about that? Or
please, sure.
So I've done it as an oral story and also a puppet show. It's called Shingebis and the North Wind, and it's a Native American tale from a tribe that lives around the Great Lakes. And it's about a little duck, and he's a diver duck. He dives under the ice to get fish, and everyone's leaving for winter, and they're saying, "Oh, you should come with us. You're going to die if you stay here. The north wind is coming," and he's so mean. And Shingabis stays, and he builds a little house, and he loads it with wood, and he's going to wait out winter. And he goes out in the wind and the storm, and he dives into the water, and he gets fish. And north wind is just blowing and blowing and blowing and trying to kill him, like completely. Like, north wind is not going to be nice. You cannot share your cookies with him and make him sweet. It's not going to happen. He's not even a human, And this is also a picture book, too, so it's pretty easy to find. But eventually, Shingabis just waits it out and keeps getting his fish, and he survives, and eventually North Wind goes away. And the connections with Hurricane Harvey are pretty obvious, because this was another terrible thing that we couldn't argue with, and we couldn't make it go away, and we couldn't solve it. All you could do was just endure it until it goes away. And but I also use it to talk about issues that I can't talk about, in schools with kids, such as abuse. Sometimes, so this is a story about meeting death on your own terms, basically, and hopefully surviving. And I think a lot of times kids just have to endure it. But this story shows that you can, and you don't have to. So there's a line in the story that goes, you sing over and over, that's like, north wind, fierce of feature, you are still my fellow creature. Do your worst, you can't scare me, I'm not afraid, and so I'm free. So, he stays centered with himself, and he believes, I'm a good duck, and I'm going to make it, So I think that's the level of story that children have the right to hear sometimes. Because sometimes you can't go in a beautiful meadow and scream and be hugged by your mom at the end. Sometimes that's not your world,
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, what a beautiful way to connect with kids using that kind of storytelling and that kind of story. And there's such a surrender in that story too, which is really a deeply spiritual concept, to truly be able to surrender and recognize that what I can do with this is be with it. I cannot change it. My ego cannot change or control this. And it is very like that with strong emotions, especially something like anger. When anger comes up, it's an immediate trigger, and there's an immediate rush of that energy. And to just teach kids and adults that it's okay just to be with it. I don't have to act on it. I don't have to try and change it. And even that song that you sang is just a beautiful way to self-soothe through a strong feeling.
Yeah, I told that story to some second graders in a school that had their school had been completely annihilated by Harvey, and they were in this old building that was temporarily being used. And I would have kids ask me, months later, "Oh, Miss Bailey, can you sing that duck song again?" They remembered it. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. And so I wanted to ask you about how what you're doing fits in with more of a holistic model of education. And I think you just described it, but I'd love to hear you talk some more about it. You've just brought in the emotional piece and even the psychological piece. So would you like to talk more about that?
Sure. More about the holistic.
What do you think that holistic education is or could be if education were more holistic? And then the work that you're doing, how does it support that?
Oh, what a wonderful thing to talk about. So for me, holistic education would be, it's a lot about just recognizing that children are humans. They're little humans, and they have very, very deep feelings, and their stories are very complex. They process thought a lot more sophisticated than they can express. And holistic would just be kind of understanding that about them, and not trying to turn them into little adults or fit them into the system by cutting out so much of who they are. Maybe I can explain that better. But
sure.
I think holistic education is everything you said about involves mind, body, spirit, and emotions of the child. But I think also just accepting the child for who she is at the time and for what she is. Letting children develop in their own way. And just recognizing that kids have good intentions, that they're trying their best. I also really think holistic education, in my dream world, it would always involve the family system, and it would always involve the parents and the community. I've taught kids both ways. I've taught with a little parent group in the park where I knew every child came with their mom, and the mom was part of the circle. And I've taught at Beehive Preschool where maybe the moms weren't necessarily there, but it's a co-op, so they're usually helping, and I've met all of their parents at least. So it's strange to me to go into schools and meet kids, and I don't know what their home life is like. I don't know how their community worked. I don't know their parents. I don't know if they ate breakfast that day or if they were bused 20 minutes to school. There's just there's so much I don't know, and ideally I would know that, and the parents would know me. There wouldn't be this strange cut, between me and the kids. And I know their regular teachers know more about their family, but that just seems strange to me, So ideally, I would always be working within a family system. Even more holistic education I would be working in we would all be in a more child-centered society. There wouldn't be. It seems like sometimes it can seem like parents and teachers and people who work with children are the ones who are concerned with children issues, but everyone else just kind of wants them out of the way, don't bring them to the art opening, they're not cool, or, making fun of moms for not being cool, mom jeans and things like that, or, public spaces not having a safe sidewalk, for instance, for Houston to walk with your children, or play areas all over. I'd love to see play areas just on every street, even if it was just a little vacant lot. All of society being more pro-child, and then even going up to healthcare and education reform. I wish everybody was as passionate about that as we are.
Yeah, I agree. And then the thing is, it just makes so much sense, even from an economic perspective, for society in general to be very concerned about the children. And I loved what you said about wanting to know more about the children and their families and where they've come from. And back in the old days, the one house school, they did. It was certainly much more community focused. The teacher was often a part of the community. And I agree with you. I think parents, no matter how old the child is, the parent should always be seen as the expert on the child. And it's not sort of education has somehow become something that we have turned over to others. And I'm just not sure we've gained as much as we hope to gain by doing that.
Definitely.
So can you talk a little bit more, if we could just come back to your work that you are doing now? So you come in and you tell this rich story that enables kids to just feel who they are and be okay about that, and then they sort of take that off into their own play. It sort of sparks their imagination. What happens next? Let's say in a session with you, you've told your story with the children, and then what might happen next from that storytelling?
I've told my story to the children, and then I bring out some loose parts that I've brought. So loose parts are basically just movable objects. They can be anything, but the children can manipulate them and change them and move them around. So cardboard boxes or crepe paper or little stickers, just some kind of object, to sort of play with. And I'll give them an activity, but it's optional. For instance, once I told the story of the Firebird to an after-school program I did. So I wasn't in a school. We were on a playground, and it could be a lot looser. That's my favorite way to work, actually. The Firebird is this Russian tale about a knight, and I had a lot of first graders and kindergartners in the class, and there's one part, I don't remember the story, but there's an elixir of death in it or something. It's like this terrible poison. So I brought these little plastic jars and water and food coloring, glitter, and a little sequin, and said, okay, you're going to make your own elixir. It can be the one of death, or it can be one of power, or it can be one of love. It can be whatever you want, but you are going to make your own potion. And then I just set out the materials and I walk away. And if a kid is like, I don't want to do that, I just want to go swing on the swing, they can. Like, this is totally, this is play, so it has to be freely chosen. So it's up to them. But the interesting thing is they almost always want to do it. What kid doesn't want to squirt food coloring and water and make it? So they all started making potions, and my plan will be like, they're going to make a potion just like in the story, and they're going to sort of play the story, but that almost never happens. But they do start making up their own stories, or instead of a potion, it might become a soup, or it might become a perfume, or all kinds of things. Or they just might enjoy like splashing around in the water, and that's it. It just becomes sort of sensory play. That happens a lot with the younger children, and that's fine too. Some of them will play. I think they'll play until their moms come like an hour later, and then they don't want to go home, or they'll continue the play at home for like a week. And others, they'll stop after 10 minutes and they'll go run on the playground and play something else. But whatever happens, I step away, and it belongs to them at that point. And some kids will really respond to one story and not so much to another. And I try to vary it up, like stories with a girl heroine, stories with a boy heroine, and I choose stories based on the personalities and interests of the kids in the class. So, but I've had moms tell me like, wow, my son came home, and based on that activity you were doing, he took out paper and started writing a whole graphic novel because he had such a story in his brain. Or, my daughter went home, and we have had a puppet show perform for us like every single night this week. We got her once. I had a little girl, and she was a preschooler, and for Christmas she asked for a suitcase so she could make a puppet show. So they got her a suitcase, and I just think that's wonderful because it came from the child. They just had this burning urge inside them because there was a story that had to come out, and it did. And if I had forced every child to make a potion and then write about it like right there, that's school. That's fine, but that's not what I love to do.
Yeah, and you talked a lot about play, and you mentioned a couple of components or elements of play, like the free choice, the using the imagination. Do you want to talk some more about why play matters? And then for the sort of skeptical, the skills are more important kind of parent, what are the cognitive benefits of playing?
Oh, gosh, there's so many. So why play matters? Play matters because it is the language of childhood. It is how children can speak. It's how they process and learn about the world. So when a child is playing, like maybe that potion game, they're learning so many skills. They're learning with their bodies by touching the water and the food coloring and checking out the colors. They're kind of doing science. They're learning social play. They're learning social skills. Do you want to play with me? Can I trade my sticker for yours? No, I don't. Or even conflict, like you threw water all over me. Just to back out and let them solve it. They're learning so many social skills. And it matters because that's kind of like their primary language. And for literacy, I think it matters because, they learned the word elixir. I mean, that's a pretty fancy word for a kindergartner or first grader. They're learning all sorts of new vocabulary and ways to put ideas together. They're learning story structure because first you have a potion, and then what's it going to do, and then what happened after it did that thing. There's a lot of complex thought cognitively going on there. And if they can't play, then it's just very reductionist. It's so. Could I go on a tangent for a second? I don't know.
Please, sure.
So my partner is a scientist, and we sometimes talk and laugh about his creative process and mine because I'm, an artist and a writer, and but he'll say there's a lot of creativity in science, and he'll talk about the scientific method. And he talked about, he has a niece who's 5, and she called him and was telling him about the scientific method, which she was learning at 5, and about how there is a process, an objective and an experiment, and then you test to get the variables, and so on and so on. But he was concerned because what she was playing was not scientific thinking at all. He said, Brooke, I don't understand, because what they can't teach is something that happens before you even think of what experiment you want to do. You're playing around with sand and water, and you suddenly wonder, why does the water flow this way when I dig the sand like this instead of flowing up? But if you weren't playing in sand and water, you would never have even thought of the question. So there's some creative process that can't even quite be defined. And I think when you're not playing and you're just like, this is story structure, there is a character, there is a setting, what does the character want? What is their problem? What is the solution? That's like dead thinking. You learn that after you've already learned how to make up a story. The story comes from just something magic. We can't really define it. But I'm a writer, and even when I'm writing, I might not play with a potion anymore, although maybe I should. That sounds fun. But I'm playing with words, and there's so much in the creative process that's you try it, it doesn't work. You try something else, it doesn't work. You're still playing.
I love that.
Play is I read a quote somewhere that says, play is the root of all creativity, whether it's entrepreneurial, whether it's scientific, whether it's artistic. If you skip that step and you don't let children know how to play as children, they can't play as adults. So that's a bad thing. Adults play, we just sort of play more in our minds.
Yeah,
that
that's
make
a
sense?
whole other,
Okay.
yeah, for sure, juicy topic. There's a researcher, Stuart Brown, who talks a lot about play as a human species and why it matters throughout our lives, and it's not just something that should end in childhood. And by all means, it's not something that should end in kindergarten or first grade.
Right. So I try to supply it in my classes, even when I go into school. Like, obviously we can't make potions, but I can bring a little sticker or something little to play with, because I try to go where the lack is. And if I see that they're writing every single day, but they don't have time for that creative play in the classroom, then I'll kind of try to sneak in it. But.
So, Brooke, if a school wanted to offer what you're doing, I know you work within the public school system. Do you work in the private sector, and would we have to go through writers in the schools or young audiences? Or if we wanted to know more about your work, can you talk about what that actually looks like out in the community? How can we connect with you?
Well, ideally I like to do, okay, I'm going to start over. You would not have to go through young audiences or writers in the schools, because what I do for them is a little bit different. It's either performance or it's definitely like the goal is to make a story at the end of the class. But for my SunBee Circle program, which is the hearing a story and then a play, you could contact me on my SunBee Circle website, and I come in after school. All I need is a playground and a parent helper, and I bring the boxes and the loose parts myself, and need 2 hours so that we have plenty of time for the free play. And you can contact me directly for that. I keep those classes a bit small, like maybe 14 to 16 kids max, because it does tend to get a little chaotic if it's more than that. But as far as me being able to give each kid the proper materials and things like that. But you could contact me directly and we could set that up.
Okay, and so would that just be for a preschool? What if a parent is listening and just wants to experience your work, but maybe their child's either not in school or their school's not receptive to this? Is there a way that they could connect with you and engage with your work too?
Oh, yes. And in fact, I also have done SunBee Circle meeting in a park where you can come with your preschooler or kindergartner, and that one I like the parents to be present the whole time. Sometimes the moms sort of participate, and sometimes they sit at a picnic table and just knit and talk amongst themselves. But if there is interest, I would put together. I was thinking of putting together a parent-child SunBee Circle group, and that one is I do it every week, and you pay by the month. So if 1 month you want to go for a month, and then another month you can't, that's fine. You can come and go as you need to. That's that one I call SunBee in the Park, and I do that through my website. I also have a Facebook page, so if somebody is interested, they can message me, and I'll announce it when I'm going to be doing it.
Okay, and we can put all of those links here connected with the recording as well. And gosh, is there anything else just that you feel like you want to leave us with? I mean, this has already been just really rich, and I've known you for a few years now, and you've given me a lot more to ponder and think about. Is there anything else that you want us to know, or just that you feel so strongly in your heart about education and what's possible?
Well, I'd love to tell parents that this is something you can do yourself. that, Lisa, as you said before, the parent is the expert on their child, and you don't have to read stories written in picture books by somebody else, and you don't have to be a professional. Please tell fairy tales to your kids at home, and don't read them from a book. Just tell them. And also, if your children are very little, they love to. You could tell any kind of story about the stuffed animals, like grab a stuffed cat and start saying meow meow. Once upon a time there was a cat. You would just be amazed about how your child is like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. They think you are the best storyteller ever. I also encourage parents to cuddle with children and tell them stories. When I was a little girl, or when you were born, I'll tell you the story of the night you were born. They love that because then you're the character and they're the character. And that's kind of a new direction in my work. I really want to get into encouraging families to tell their family stories because then as children get older, middle school, teenagers, you can start telling stories about your ancestors. And that's just a whole other topic that I think society would be really, really healed if we all knew where we were coming from a little better. So
that leaves me with wanting you to come back, and can we just talk about that subject?
Oh, I'd love to. That's something I've been developing and researching a lot about how to pass on your heritage. Because stories really, even though I use them with kids for entertainment and emotional release and cognitive stuff and all, they were really meant to pass on the values of a society. And you would hear them from your mom and your dad and your village storyteller. So I think the using stories for that is kind of underused, So I'm really exploring about how we could use stories for that purpose.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. I would want the parents to tell those kind of stories to kids, not me, because I don't know what values you want to teach your. You know what I mean? It's very that's very intimate. So.
Sure. Yeah. Actually, was speaking with the mom just yesterday or 2 days ago about that, and she kind of teared up thinking about how important that message that you shared with her was and how meaningful her experience has been with her own children, learning to just tell their birth stories and tell their family stories. So, yes, I'd love to see you doing more of that too, and I'm just really happy and grateful for the work that you already are doing and have been doing, Brooke. You're like a unicorn. And I think there are a lot of other people like you, but no one's doing the work exactly the way that you do it. I know that there are other people out there doing amazing work in education, and I'm so grateful that you shared with us about your work, and I know that anyone who listens to this will be inspired to do even just one slight thing differently or some new idea, whether it's parents or teachers or all the above. So thank you, Brooke.
Oh, thank you so much. I also wanted to add that on my website is a blog where I share stories that that have worked for me with children, or just fun fairy tales that might be hard to find or you hadn't noticed, and also more thoughts too about my work and what it means. I'm a writer, so I have to write my thought process. So if anyone is interested in my work or journey or the fairy tales, I put it all out there if you want.
Yeah, and it's a great resource. I've been there. It's an excellent resource for parents to go to. Can you just tell us the address again?
It's sunbeecircle.com.
That's easy enough. Well, thank you so much, Brooke. And thank you. Thank you for listening, our listeners, to the podcast for Texas Holistic Educators. Thank you for the brave work that you're doing to build a healthier, more sustainable model of education in Texas and beyond. Until next time.
Thanks so much for having me.